Welcome to our lecture on fabric selection for textiles. And in this lecture, we'll be talking about examining and looking at taking everything we've discussed all through the semester in fabric selection. So obviously, the first thing we tend to look at for textiles is aesthetics. So obviously, that's what the average person first looks at. So it's always the first item that we consider in terms of selecting a textile or an item that's made out of textile is what it looks like, right from afar, what it looks like on the hanger, what it looks like on the picture. So it's basically assessing visually by just the appearance, just how it looks, just the aesthetic. So things that affect that would be color, the saturation, the hue of the actual color, whether it's very saturated, very vivid, or maybe a soft color, very, a pastel, but it's the actual color. So the attainment of color would matter. The luster, the amount of shine that is reflected, how much light is reflected from the surface, so how much shine or shimmer. So the actual light that's being reflected back, the touch, and then that usually attracts someone to go touch it, right? So if it's a garment on a hanger, it gets you to walk over to the rack and touch, or the shelf and touch the garment. Or if it's an actual piece of furniture, right? Or an actual pillow, it gets you to walk over and touch the pillow or touch the couch or the upholstered chair. So it gets you to actually touch it, and at that point, the hand, how it feels. And the drape. So if there's anything that's hanging, so whether it's draperies or like a maxi duster or a sweater or a dress, how it hangs, the drape. So how it hangs on the hanger as well as how it hangs on the mannequin or on the body. Also, a visual scan to look for defects and imperfections, and we've discussed them throughout the semester, but it's really important that when we look at this, you're paying attention to everything from the surface texture and how it feels and how it looks, and getting you to touch it and actually seeing how it feels. So fabric imperfections. So this is a listing of typical fabric imperfections. So things like missing a yarn in the fabric, a non-uniform yarn, and that's if it's by mistake. In other words, there are times where you can remember we've talked about yarns, slub yarns, where it's thicker in some areas and thinner in others, but we're talking like non-uniform. So the idea is it's supposed to be all uniform, and there's an area where it's thicker. That would be not intentional. So bowing or skewing, so the grain or the stripes, the pattern's not straight, maybe the pattern wasn't placed well, or it wasn't knitted or woven well. Misweave or misknit, so error in the actual design. Non-uniformity of color, so this is where we have shading, streaking, fading. When things are printed and they're off register, so the print doesn't look right or it doesn't fit properly, and uneven finishes. So sometimes the finish, whether it's because the temperature was off by a degree, or it was taken out, the timer was off, it was released too early, or you left it in the heat too long. For whatever reason, sometimes you have non-uniformity in the finish, the chemical finish. You also have to look at suitability. You have to consider factors such as how often is that garment going to be worn? If it's something that's meant to last, you're going to wear it again and again. A stronger, better textile and better construction matters, right? Because the customer is going to be willing to pay more, and they're expecting it to last. If it's not, I'm going to wear it once, it's for a special occasion, for a quinceañera or a cocktail event, I'm going to wear it once only. Then you realize, well, it's not meant to be worn again and again and again. So those are things you have to consider. How often is it going to be laundered? So it's not just how you're going to wear it, how often you're going to be laundering it, because pants and bottoms tend to be worn a couple of times before you wash it, unless there's a stain on it. Versus tops. Tops will typically be washed every time you wear it. So you have to think about that, how often it's going to be laundered, how it's going to be laundered, if it's going to be thrown in the washer dryer, if it's going to be dry cleaned, and what typical activities are happening when you're wearing it. Are you going to be exercising, sweating, stretching? Is it, dancing? Is it you're typically sitting? What are you typically doing when you're wearing those garments? You have to look at the use, and you need to really see the big picture. You have to take everything, and I mean everything we've talked about, everything from the fibers to the yarns to the fabrication, to the chemical finishing, to the testing, to now. We're taking everything. So for example, I'm looking at a fabric for a t-shirt dress for my 6-year-old niece, right? She's 6 years old. She's a little girl. She's active. And think about what I'm asking for, a t-shirt dress. Okay, so it's going to be a dress. I want it to look cute and feminine, but it's a t-shirt dress. It's casual dress. It's not a fancy dress. It's casual. I want her to be able to play in it. So she's 6. Comfort would be important. It should stretch. So it's a t-shirt dress. It should stretch. So guess what? That should be a knit right there. That's your clue. It needs to be a knit. It's for my niece. She's going to spill. She's going to get it dirty. It needs to be something she could put on we can wash, dry, and she could wear it again. Okay. Easy to wash, affordable. She's going to grow out of it. So it's not something that we'd be willing to spend, $100 if she's only going to wear it for a little bit. So it needs to be affordable. So I want it to be out of cotton. So it's comfortable, it's breathable, it's affordable. It makes sense to do a 30 single baby rib or jersey knit because it'll stretch, it'll move. 100% cotton would be good, and available in bright colors. She likes bright pinks and purples, so something that could take color well. I do want it so I can be able to probably print or draw on it. So I want a smooth surface. So I probably do want yarns that have been combed and carded and combed and ring spun. So it gives me a flatter surface to draw on, so it won't be so fuzzy. Just enough so it'll last. I do have to pay just a little bit more to give me that nice flat surface, smooth surface, but it's worth it. It'll give me a soft tan. See, I'm taking everything, the fiber, the yarn, the construction, and putting it into my choice. Do you see where I'm going with this? And that's what I mean by looking at the big picture. So you have to go back and review, because a lot of you you look at the current subject of the week and you forget about it and you're done. And you can't do that with textiles. You can't do that with fashion in general. You have to take everything and compile it. It compounds on each other. It builds on each other. So that's really important. Another thing to look at is the average lifetime of a piece of clothing. You have to look at what typically is expected. So just so you know, the average lifetime of a typical average garment is 3 years. The average American keeps their apparel items for about roughly, on average, okay, some people more, some people less, 6 months. So the items that have the shortest lifespan, so these are things that don't last as long or people get rid of faster, are leggings, bras, underwear, socks, casual at-home clothing worn every day, like for home and garden, and casual outside home clothing and clothing for work. Okay, so leggings, bras, underwear, socks, these are things that tend to have the shortest lifespan. So keep that in mind. That's why you see really cheap leggings. People wear a couple of times and they get rid of it. The elasticity goes away. It loses shape as you wash it, and boom, it's done. Unless you get some really expensive ones. And bras, same thing. Now, bras have gone very expensive. They're not cheap. So people have turned to cheaper alternatives. People have spent a lot of money on bras, and lately the quality has dropped, and that's why brands have struggled, and new brands have been emerging, because brands like Victoria's Secret, for example, have been struggling lately. So keep that in mind, the typical lifespan of garments. When you look at selection, you have to look at the following, and this is going to be on your quiz, it's going to be on your final. You have to look at fiber content. Okay, so you have to look at the properties of cotton, for example, polyester, rayon, wool, looking at natural versus synthetic and the individual properties. And we went through all the main ones. Then the actual fabrication, jersey. So the benefit of jersey versus baby rib versus intarsia knit versus a pearl. You have to know these things. On a woven, what's the difference between a plain weave versus a twill weave versus a satin weave? Okay. Yarn properties, so spun versus filament. Spun yarn being made out of staple fibers, filament versus made out of filament fibers. So yarn properties in a slub yarn versus a carded yarn versus a comb yarn. Ring spun, right? Versus open spinning yarn. Abrasion resistance, pilling propensity, the the possibility of it to pill. How strong is it? How soft is it? These are all things you have to consider. Okay. So fabric properties, again, woven versus a knit, the strength, the slippage, how breathable is it? Is it good cover? Is it opaque? The drapeability, the wrinkling, the color, consistency of color and dye. So please read up on all this. When it comes to floor coverings, you have to take into consideration, really even more so than even garments or certain garments, is abrasion resistance, right? So you really have to think about the fiber content. You really can't stray too much on carpetings. For example, you really have to stick with nylon, polyester, olefin. There's only a handful of fibers you can use. For carpet, for example, you have to look at density, how the pile is and the pile height and the finishes. So you have to consider that. You have to consider, the more compact the pile, the better the durability. If it's really fluffy, and you keep stepping on it, it's going to crush down. So it feels really nice when it's brand new. Those cheap carpeting feel really nice when they're new. They look terrible after a year or two because it was really pile. It was really, the height was really high, but then you crushed it. So lower pile is longer lasting, but of course the higher pile does feel plusher, feels softer. And then if you wanted to really not stain as badly, then you have to add that stain repellent, so what we call Scotch Guard. And anti-static is what typically you want to add on there. So you have to think about the use, okay? So thank you for listening. Part 2 will be textiles and the environment.